Hello, law class. What you are looking at here is the study guide for your first exam. And I'm going to zip through this pretty quickly. However, if you missed a class, there's more details on Google Classroom, and this document is also on Google Classroom, and you can print it out and do a practice run or two if you are so inclined. So here are the questions on your exam. Question 1. What are the three branches of government, and what is each responsible for? The judicial branch interprets law, the executive branch enforces law, and the legislative branch create laws or make laws. And the legislative branch, we're talking Congress, Senate, and the House. The executive branch, the president and the cabinet, and the judicial branch, the court systems. And then question 2 has to do with philosophies we deal with in law. Rehabilitation. So that's somebody who made a mistake. You give them a pass and you try to help them along, give them the tools they need to be okay. Retribution is the opposite. That's straight up punishment. You messed up. We want you to suffer. Now, deterrence is when you try to make an example out of somebody to scare others into compliance or to following the laws. So let's say somebody in class was chewing gum and I lost my mind and screamed and blah, blah, blah. It's in the hopes that people observe that and they don't chew gum. The divine command theory are people who believe that laws derive from God. They say, well, why do I follow this rule or this law? My religious text tells me to, which brings us to the problem for letter E, the Euthyphro dilemma. Let's say you have people of different religious backgrounds who use divine command theory. They're probably going to butt heads. And if you're a student of history, you've seen that just a few times. Now, natural law theory is the belief that there's just natural inherent laws that people will figure out, that you observe, you see the world around you, and that people will fundamentally do the right things. Also, that we are all born with certain rights. So that goes along with natural law theory. Now, virtue ethics is when you have a system of ethics based on a virtue. So, for instance, if I have this class is going to be run on two things: respect and kindness. It's a nice idea. However, is it a bit ambiguous to what you find respectful or what you find kind versus somebody else? Now, deontology, otherwise known as Kant's categorical imperative, is an absolutist thinking. There's absolute right, absolute wrong. I stole, wrong. It's not, I stole a loaf of bread to feed my hungry children. No, stealing is wrong. It's an absolute form of thinking. And utilitarianism, what is best for everyone. Now, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. So if I counted the students in my class and I had 20 female students, 10 male students, I said, this whole class is for the ladies. Well, I'm ruling out or I'm leaving out 10 other people. However, it might work, say, hey, this test, do you want it to be multiple choice or do you want it to be um, essay, and 90% said multiple choice? Probably I can do that. That fits within that. Now, question 3, the differences between positive and negative liberty. So in our legal system, there's certain things we have positive liberty. I have the freedom to choose any occupation I want. I have the freedom to travel wherever I want. With negative liberty, I have the freedom from oppression. I have the freedom from racism. Now, seems simple, but sometimes it's not. Take religion, for example. I have the freedom to worship however I want to worship, but I have the freedom from being preached to by some other religion I don't believe in, that kind of thing. Now, question 4, the differences between John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. Now, these two philosophers had very different takes on the social contract, state of nature, role of government. For the sake of time, I'm not going to break it down. But on a fundamental level, John Locke felt that people were fundamentally decent in a state of nature. People are going to do the right things and get along, and that governments are for the people, that governments exist for the people, whereas Thomas Hobbes reversed it. People are fundamentally unpleasant. People are fundamentally going to do the wrong thing, and the government exists to pretty much keep you in check. What are your rights? They're the rights I tell you. So you can think of certain systems of government, like our American Republic, a lot of influence from Locke. But if you look at more totalitarian regimes, a lot of influence from Hobbes. Now, question 5, methods used to remedy conflict outside of a courtroom. Now, I think there's a myth that every conflict goes to a full-bore jury trial. Very time-consuming, very expensive. Most of the time, it's fixed outside of a courtroom. The most common, people talk it out. They realize it's expensive. Maybe they just haven't had a miscommunication. They talk it out and they're good. If that doesn't work, go a little lighter than some other headline than a court. Have a mediator, have somebody who shows up, tries to find a common solution, that kind of thing. You can go to an ombudsman. If you go to university, there's an ombudsman at university, and they can make a decision. For instance, roommates. I want to switch my roommate. I want to go to a different dorm. Well, they can determine it. Now, an arbitrator, it's almost like a pseudo judge. You pay for that person, and they hear both sides and they make their decision. Cheaper than a jury trial, however, they are pretty expensive. So there's other methods outside of a courtroom to fix a problem. Now, question 6, what steps would you take as a mediator and what goals? So we simulated that in class. So a mediator, calm, neutral, set some ground rules, don't let people talk over each other, propose some different solutions. No, a mediator is there to help, but they have no real teeth. If they can't come to a solution at the end, they have to maybe move to something a little heavier. But if you're a mediator, you're looking for common solutions, calm, neutral, that kind of thing. Number 7, this is more of a general life thing, but how should you talk to people in conflict? And you've seen the hallways of Clarenceville. There's a lot of conflict. And sometimes I think to myself, if people conducted themselves with a little better decorum, we could alleviate some of those conflicts. So when you're in a conflict situation, calm, rational, factual. Don't get emotional, don't swear, flail your arms, scream, that kind of thing. Just present the issue in a calm, factual, logical way, and the other person can do the same, and hopefully you can remedy the situation. Now, question 8 has to do with some pretty important precedents. Now, if you recall what the word precedent meant, it's when the Supreme Court said this is the way it is, that's the way it is. So Marbury versus Madison may be the most important precedent in U.S. history. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and which buttressed that, letter B, McCulloch versus Maryland, in issues of state versus federal win. Now, McCulloch did some other things like a common currency, and they handled the trade sort of issues, but it reinforced Marbury. Now, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, was the beginning of an era called Jim Crow America, and it was predicated on separate but equal. Now, it certainly was separate, equal, probably not. And in history class, you've seen black theater, black drinking fountain, white drinking fountain. And that went on until 1954 with Brown versus Board of Education, which ended that separate but equal, but brought integration, that people are integrated now. It's the end of Plessy. Now, Gideon versus Wainwright, a very outstanding book called Gideon's Trumpet, if you ever have a chance to read that book. But Gideon hand wrote on a sheet of lined paper his issue. He went through the court system without representation, and at the end of it, they said everybody gets legal representation. Even if you're in poverty, if you can't afford a lawyer, everybody gets an attorney. Now, Miranda versus Arizona. Now, Miranda was a bad guy. He was arrested. He didn't know his rights, and so now when you are in that situation, you are read your rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can or will be used against you in a court of law. In fact, we call that reading of your Miranda rights. Now, Roe versus Wade, until very recently, allowed federal protections for women who chose to have an abortion. Recently, it has switched to a state-by-state basis, and there's a huge variety. As I'm making this video, I don't know what the future is going to hold, but that's the way it is. Now, U.S. versus Nixon is a reinforcement of this idea of rule of law. Everybody has to follow the law. And this is in the context of Watergate, and in a unanimous court decision, they said, Nixon, you have to follow the law. Just because you're the president doesn't mean you're immune from following the law. Now, question 9, what is judicial review? Now, think about this. We have these checks and balances. This is very powerful for the judicial branch. To make a law, it's a big process. It goes from House and committees and arguing and debating, then to the Senate and blah, 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 blah. Big process to make a law. So a law is made. The president has to sign it and everything. Supreme Court can look at that law and say, nope, it's not constitutional. We're throwing it out. So that's what makes it such a powerful function. By far the most powerful function of the judicial branch. And the last question, federalism. So power resides at 3 different levels. So for instance, it's not the Michigan Army or the Michigan Post Office, the U.S. Post Office. The U.S. Army. There's certain powers that reside at the federal level. If you look at my fishing license, my driver's license, it doesn't say America fishing license or that kind of thing. It says Michigan fishing license, Michigan driving license. So there's certain things at the state level, and then local. Just within our class, we have several different communities people live in. Some communities you can have 3 dogs, some you can have 4 dogs. That's a local decision. So we divide up power at 3 different levels, and the amendment that relates to it is the 10th Amendment, and I just went over some real world examples. So you do have a 3x5 card that you can write some notes down, and that is designed for you to look through this and skip the stuff you know and write down the stuff you don't. And if you put your time in, make a nice card, should get a good grade. That is my hope for you. And hopefully this helped, and looking forward to a lot of success. Appreciate you watching.